Hello students. Today we are going to read a very interesting poem called A Legend of the Northland by Phoebe Cary. This poem is actually a ballad. Ballad is a song-like poem that tells a story in short stanzas. And the best part is this story has a moral lesson for all of us. So let's go stanza by stanza. Stanza 1 is Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. The poet starts the poem by talking about a place called the Northland. Northland means the cold northern region, a land full of snow and ice. Here, the days are very short and the nights are very long. In fact, the nights are so long that people cannot even sleep through them. So in this stanza, the poet begins with a unique background for the story. Now that we know about the place, the poet shows us how people live there in the next stanza. In this stanza, she says, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny, furry clothes. Here, people harness means people tie with the straps the fast reindeers to sledges. Sledges are wooden carts used to travel on snow. And the children in that region wear furry clothes. Furry means covered with fur. And in those clothes, they look just like little bear cubs. And now, after the background is set, the poet starts a story that people in this region tell. She says, they tell them a curious story. I don't believe it is true. And yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. The poet says, the people of this land tell a curious story. Curious means strange or unusual. She herself is not sure if this story is true. But still, she shares the story because there is a lesson in it for us. So now, the actual story begins. The story begins with Saint Peter, who was a follower of Jesus Christ. The poet says, once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, he came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. When Saint Peter lived on earth, he went from place to place preaching. Preaching means teaching moral and religious values. One day while traveling, he reached a cottage where a woman was making cakes on her hearth. Hearth means fireplace. So in the previous stanzas we met the main characters of the story, and now let's see what happened between them. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Saint Peter was very weak and tired because he had been fasting all day. Fasting means not eating food. So he politely asked the woman for just one cake from her store. And now let's see how the woman reacts. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Therefore she needed another, and still a smaller one. But it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. Okay, let's pause here for word meanings. Dough means soft mixture of flour and water used to make a bread. And kneaded means pressed and rolled dough to make it soft. Wafer means very thin biscuit like bread. So what happened here? The woman kept making smaller and smaller cakes, but every time she thought, oh, this is too big to give away. Finally, she made a paper thin cake like a wafer, but still she was not able to give even that away. This shows her greedy and selfish nature. Now let's see what happens when Saint Peter notices her greedy behavior. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm." Here, provoke means to make someone angry, and dwell means to live. Saint Peter became angry and said, "You are far too selfish to live as a human and enjoy food, shelter, and warmth." So now the story moves to her punishment. Let's see what punishment Saint Peter gave her. He said, "Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard, dry wood." Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Here, scanty means very little, and boring means drilling or making holes. Saint Peter cursed her to live as a bird. Now she would have to build her own shelter like birds do, and get very little food by boring holes in dry wood. Immediately she flew out of the chimney and became a woodpecker. This was her punishment. And finally, the poet describes her appearance as a bird and connects the story to real life. The poet says, "She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same. But all the rest of her clothes were burnt black as a coal in the flame. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food." Here, scarlet means dark red. So the red cap she was wearing became the red head of the woodpecker, and the rest of her clothes burnt black like coal. And the poet says, even today, school children can see the woodpecker in the forest, boring holes in trees for food. And this way, the legend ends. Okay, so what do we learn from this? Always be kind, and always share what you have, and help people when they need it, because that is what good humans do. Alright, this was the poem A Legend of the Northland. That is all for today's class. I hope you understood the poem well. I'll see you in the next class with another poem. Till then, stay happy, keep studying, and bye for now.